in a big container on the counter.
Woohoo!
We're here. So far, so good. Hi, everybody. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
I imagine that a few more folks will be joining us in the coming minutes, but I want to honor those who are here now. So let's start with the blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And I want to apologize again for last time. Hopefully now we are all good with one link where we can all gather. And for anyone who wasn't able to join live last time because of the technical difficulties, I am particularly sorry, but I'm glad that we are all here together now. Yes, Diane.
I went and listened yesterday. It was marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel that I was a little frazzled by the technical difficulties, but I'm glad that in the end, we got to spend Shavuot studying Ruth and Naomi together. And hopefully it'll be a little smoother sailing. I think that Rabbi Joseph she wrote an apology email to me after that. And I think that she said something about Revelation never being easy. So I appreciated that take on things. So I'm going to go ahead and put the document for today into the chat.
You want to make anyone a co-host before you go further?
Sure.
Do need anyone?
Sure.
Steve is here and so am I.
Okay, great. So let me make you both co-hosts. And then should anything come up, you have the power. I am putting the document for today into the chat. Laura should have emailed it to people in advance, but especially because there was no registration for today's event, I want to make sure everyone has access to this. So we are officially in session 2 of our 6-part series on the women you won't meet in Hebrew school. And we started with the women that you are most likely to meet in Hebrew school, which is Ruth and Naomi. And now we are going to move each week sort of farther and farther away from women who you might have encountered before and who are sort of normative in Jewish spaces. So today we are going to take a look at Deborah, Yael, and Sisera's mother. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Great. So if anyone would like to volunteer to read today, I would ask you to raise your electronic hand, which pops you up to the top of my screen so that I can see you to call on you. And we are going to start by reading a bit of the actual Torah portion that these women appear in, which is in Judges chapters 4 and 5. So Sally, I'll ask you to read the selections from Judges chapter 4, and then Julie, if you'll read from Judges chapter 5.
Deborah, a prophetess, a woman of flames, judged Israel at the time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah, and the Israelites would come to her for justice. She sent for Barak and said to him, "Has not Yahweh, God of Israel, commanded, go, march to Mount Tabor, and with you take 10,000 men. I shall entice Sisera, the army commander, and I shall put him into your power." Barak replied, If you come with me, I shall go. If you will not come, I shall not go. I shall go with you then, she said, but the way you are going about it, the glory will not be yours, for Yahweh will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman. Deborah then stood up and went with Barak. At Barak's advance, Yahweh struck terror into Sisera and all his chariots and his entire army. Sisera leapt down from his chariot and fled on foot. Sisera's whole army fell by the edge of the sword. Not one man was spared. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot towards the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Yael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Stay here, my lord, with me. Do not be afraid." He stayed with her in her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. He said to her, "Please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." She opened the skin of milk, gave him some to drink, and covered him up again. Then he said to her, "Stand at the tent door, and if anyone comes and questions you, if he asks, 'Is there a man here?' say no." Then Yael took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly unto him and drove the peg into his temple, right through to the ground. He was lying fast asleep, worn out. Thus he died. And now Barak came up in pursuit of Sisera. Yael went out to meet him and said, "Come in, and I will show you the man you are looking for." He went into her tent, and there was Sisera dead, with the tent peg through his temple.
Thank you. Thanks very much. A little light reading for your Sunday morning. I'm going to go ahead and stop the screen share for a moment. Anyone who wants to look at the text alongside us now can access it directly, and I'll put it again in the chat box for anyone who came in after the last time I shared it. But before we move on to the next portion of the telling of this story in Judges chapter 5, I just want to ask, what happens? What's your understanding of what's the story that unfolds here? Who is Deborah? Who's Yael? Who's Barak? Who's Sisera? And, just as a group, if we can sort of summarize the story that we've read. Yeah, Diane. Diane and then Judith.
Deborah is a prophetess. She's one of the famous judges. And Sisera, the wife of Heber, the Kenites. I recognize the Kenite because the Kenites is Zephode is one of my Jews is they had some land grants from Moses when they came across, but a lot of them died. I can't remember why though. There was a rebellion, wasn't there? And not all of them died because they kind of rebelled against God, didn't they?
You officially know more about the Kenites than I do, Diane, but I think what is important to note about the fact that Yael is a Kenite is that she is specifically not an Israelite. She is not one of us. And so we've got Deborah, and Deborah is a judge, a prophetess, right? Very few women in biblical literature are called a prophetess. So Deborah is one of them. And important to know historically that the book of Judges and the period of Judges comes immediately before the period of Kings. And actually, all of these stories that we read in Judges are meant to be a kind of a Wild West to show us what happens when we don't have a monarch as our governor. And they're actually supposed to convince us that we need to be governed by kings. The entire book of Judges is actually meant to pave the way to the book of Kings and to the idea that we should accept onto ourselves the monarchy. So Deborah is in this Wild West period. She is a prophetess. She is a judge. How do we know that she's a judge? What's she doing in the beginning of the story? Where does she sit? Judith, if you did you want to jump in earlier?
Don't know the answer to this question though, and I'm actually surprised that you're saying that Judges is supposed to lead us to want to have a king, because when we first decide to have a king, God's like, no, 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 you're not supposed to have kings. Okay, fine, you can have a king if you really want one, but it's a bad idea. And then of course it is.
Yes, all accurate. And at the end of the day, you know, the stories of the kings are probably written by Solomon, someone in Solomon's court, to prove why we needed to have kings. So it makes sense that there's some tension in the beginning about whether or not we, the people, wanted to have kings. There's certainly a lot of politicization of the idea of whether or not we should have kings, including maybe the stories that we inherit in the book of Judges to tell us, but look how bad everything was before the kings came. Okay, Phyllis, you had your hand up.
She was sitting under the palm of Deborah, whatever that is. But I wondered, what is a woman of flames?
Excellent, wonderful. Yay. So she's sitting under the palm of Deborah. We don't know what that means, but most likely the palm of Deborah is a tree or a hill or an area that actually is named after Deborah. Right? So this is telling us that she is such a famous, well-known and beloved judge that the people come to her for judgment, and probably even the place where she sat to give judgment came to be named for her. Much like today we have street names named after historical figures, the same kind of concept. Where can I need judgment? Where can I find Deborah? Oh, you'll find her there under the palm of Deborah. So there are two ways that you can read this when it goes from the Hebrew to the English. So it says in the Hebrew that it's Devorah, Ishot Lapidot, okay? And that has two translations. One of them is wife of Lapidot. So in many, many, many translations of the book of Deborah, you'll read the translation as Deborah the prophetess, the wife of Lapidot. But we don't have any other biblical character of Lapidot. This is not like a well-known man. And so there is some, especially in modern feminist thinking about Devorah, there's some saying, well, why do we think that that's what it means? When there's another translation for Ishot Lapidot, which is woman of flames. And even the rabbis wrote a midrash about her and said, why is she a woman of flames? She was a candle maker. She kept the candles for the temple. And they come up with all of this midrash about her connection to flames. So in Mickey Raver's translation, which is the translation that we have today, she chooses to go the route of woman of flames. The truth is that either one of them is as likely, but because we don't have a character of Lapidot and we know that Deborah is so powerful and so renowned, it elevates her more to think of her as being a woman of flames being a moniker for her, as opposed to being known as someone's wife when there's no other evidence that she was actually married to anyone. Okay, so we've got Deborah. She's sitting under the palm of Deborah. She is judging Israel. She's renowned for her skills as a judge. People are coming from all over for her judgment. And then we have Barak. Now, who is Barak? Barak is the Israelite army commander, okay? And Barak comes to Deborah and he says, I can't defeat Sisera, who's the great commander on the other side, the enemy, the commander of our enemy. I cannot defeat him without you. Please come with me, okay? So we have this very strong, very powerful military man coming to this woman and saying, please, Deborah, I can't go and fight the other side's army if you don't come with me. Which is, like, for biblical literature, actually a pretty funny moment, right? Like, we don't have a whole lot of this going on in biblical literature. It shows how powerful Deborah was, and it shows how revered she was. That Barak didn't have faith in his own ability to defeat the enemy without Deborah at his side. And she's not coming as a military leader. She's not fighting. She's coming to bring the thing that she brings, which is her wisdom and her ability to judge. So Deborah says, okay, I'll go with you, but you should know, and you should know now, that Sisera is going to be delivered into the hand of a woman, right? So she prophesies that Sisera, the enemy of the other side, is going to be delivered into the hand of a woman. At this point in the story, we assume that that woman is going to be Deborah. She's the powerful woman who Barak can't go into battle without. Instead, Barak is successful in his campaign against Sisera. Sisera runs away from the army and he goes to this Kenite camp, which is probably a mostly neutral third party or even an ally of Sisera's side. And he goes and he finds Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. So what happens then? What is the exchange between Yael and Sisera?
She offers him, or she gives him shelter, and he says to protect, wants her to protect him, make sure that nobody knows he's there. And so she takes advantage of the situation and kills him.
Yeah, true. So
We don't know why.
we don't know why. And this is just one of these questions that has bothered scholars, rabbinic and otherwise, for thousands of years. We don't know why. But Sisera goes to Yael seeking hospitality, right? Seeking sanctuary, essentially. And he asks her for water and she gives him milk. And she lays him down and she goes to him softly. And when he's resting or sleeping, having drank this milk that she gave him, she takes a tent peg and she drives it through his temple. It's quite a moment in biblical literature. And we don't know why, because she's not an Israelite. And we don't even have evidence that the Kenites are allies of the Israelites. So Sisera should have had every reason to believe that he should have actually found safety with Yael. So one possible explanation for why Yael did this from a literary perspective is that history is written by the victors, right? This is something I'm going to say over and over and over again in these sessions, right? History is written by the victors. We're the victors. We're the ones telling this story. And in our version of the story, we get to say, oh, he went into the tent of Yael, and of course she was a hero for the Jewish people, and she killed him, right? We don't have to think about why she might have done that. It can be a literary device that she turns out to be a hero for the Israelite people. We don't know. We don't know from a gynocentric perspective, where we're looking at it from Yael's point of view, which is what we're invited to do in this series. We don't know why she did what she did. Okay, but now we have an idea of the story that actually unfolds in Judges 4. So I'm going to share my screen again. Yes, Diane?
Well, I have one question. She covers him with a blanket. Does that mean the same thing it does last week with Ruth? Okay.
No, love that though. She's not uncovering his feet.
Good.
But I'm glad that that's now what you think of when people are covered and uncovered in
No,
biblical literature.
no, not necessarily, but I have heard that about this passage before also, that she was kind of stuck too.
There are some moments that happen in the Yael narrative specifically that can be read through a few different lenses, right? So first of all, she gives him milk, she covers him with a blanket, and she makes sure that he falls asleep. Those three things all sound like what category of female experience? Motherhood. Yeah. So one lens that this story is read through is through the lens of motherhood. And then another is a more sexualized lens. And there's even midrash that says that Yael seduced him, et cetera, et cetera. But on the face of the text itself, actually, it reads more like she cared for him like a mother and breached hospitality than it does like it has a sexual undertone. I've never been a huge fan of that particular midrash because I think that sometimes the rabbis have a hard time imagining women's power taking a form other than sexual. And in this case, she's very strong. I mean, how strong did one have to be to lift a tent peg? How physically strong did one have to be to lift a tent peg and be able to, lift it over your head and drive it through someone's skull? That's some pretty serious upper arm strength. I certainly wouldn't be able to do it. So I'd like to give Yael credit where credit is due. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share again. Okay, and Julie, if you would read for us Judges chapter 5, and just so you know, it looks different on the page because in the Bible, it's in poem form.
The Song of Deborah. On that day, Deborah and Barak sang this song. In the days of Yael, caravans stopped and wayfarers went by roundabout paths. The village life in Israel ceased till Deborah arose a mother in Israel. Most of the blessed women as Yael of tent dwelling, women she is most blessed. Where is it? Most blessed. Okay. Water she asked for, milk she gave him. In a lordly bowl, she brought him curd. Her left hand reached for the tent peg, her right hand for the hammer. She struck Sisera, she smashed his head. Yea, she pierced and shattered his temples. At her feet, he crumpled, he fell. There he sank, there he lay, destroyed. At the window, she leans and watches. Sisera's mother cries through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why is the clatter of the chariot delayed? The wisest of her ladies answers, and she herself repeats, are they not finding and sharing the spoils? Two girls for each warrior, colorful garments as plunder, embroidered scars for me. So may all your enemies perish. Oh yeah, let those who love you be like the sun when it emerges in all of its strength. And the country had peace for 40 years.
Thank you very much. So I included a little note here. This song, just what Julie just read, most likely dates to the late 12th century BCE, and it may be the earliest poem in the Hebrew Bible. So we're just going to take a closer look at what happens here in Judges chapter 5. So this song, this poem, starts with a retelling of what we just read in Judges chapter 4. On that day, it says Deborah and Barak sang this song. So this is supposed to be a sort of a victory song after Barak wins, that Deborah and Barak sing together, which it becomes kind of reminiscent of the Song of the Sea and the sort of victory poetry that appears after the Red Sea, the parting of the Red Sea. So in the days of Yael, right? So Yael has become a hero by the time that this poem is written. We are now writing victory songs and setting them in the days of Yael. And remember, Deborah and Barak are singing this. So she says, till I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. So here, again, we have another kind of motherhood in this story, right? So we talked already about reading the story of Yael through a lens of motherhood. And there's a whole line of scholarly thought about how you can read the different characters, all three of them that we're going to look at today, through the lens of motherhood. So in Deborah's case, there is no evidence that she was herself a mother of children. It's maybe we could read that she was the wife of Lapidoth, but we don't see any information about who she was the mother of. Instead, she becomes a mother in Israel, or a mother of Israel, mother of the people who she judges. For her to have been this powerful leader, and then the metaphor to be used in her victory song to be a mother in Israel is just interesting. Most blessed of women is Yael. Of tent-dwelling women, she is most blessed. So we have put Yael on quite a pedestal. Water he asked for, milk she gave him. And that's a repetition of what we read before. In a lordly bowl, she brought him curd. That's an addition that comes in here in this poem. And then we have a poetic retelling of the piercing of his head with the tent peg, and of his dying. So we have here in this heroic poetry retelling of the story of Yael, we see her bringing down Sisera. And then
I had one quick question. I thought he was fast asleep and she killed him, and now it says that he fell.
Right.
So it seems like he wasn't lying down at that point.
Yeah, that's a great point. So he fell here could be operating in one of two ways, at least one of two ways. One of them could be like the idea like someone falls in battle, like what befalls someone, right? So felled could be a poetic word for he met his end, right? Or it could be that he was standing and he fell, which then would be the poem telling the story in a slightly different way, which we know that it might do because we've already seen this addition of the curd here. So the poem is definitely taking some liberties. At her feet, he crumpled, he fell, certainly makes it sound like he was in a position to crumple and fall rather than already sleeping on the floor. Excellent. Okay, so that's the first part of the poem, is this poetic retelling of what we've just read in Judges chapter 4. And then we take a really interesting turn with the appearance of Sisera's mother. So what do we see happening here?
Well, first off, she's at a window, so not in a tent. I mean, she's crying through the lattice of a window.
Okay, great. So this is Sisera's mother, right? Not Yael. Who's Sisera? The one that Yael slays. So this is the mother of the man who was just slain in the previous verse, of the great war hero of the other side, right? So very interesting that the authors of this poem chose now to shift away from our heroes, from Deborah and Yael and Barak, and to go all the way over to wherever Sisera lives and is coming from, and to tell this part of the story from the perspective of his mother. Okay, great. So she's at the window, she's crying through the lattice. Yeah, Sherry?
Yeah, I'm taken by that about going to the other side, because I think in all wars, I mean, we see things from our perspective. We don't see the perspective of other people, and to really put a human face on the people that are behind this leader. Whatever he was, he had a mother, and like all mothers, she worries about her son. He's going off to war, regardless of why he's going to war, or whose fault, or who's responsible. It's her child, and it brings a human face to it. It's kind of I like the fact that the author of the poem brought this forth. I mean, it's very easy to look at no matter whom you're fighting. It's very easy to look at the other side, the enemy, as some kind of a monster without any human emotions or anything like that. And it reminds us that this is a human being. This is not an animal. This is somebody that has a mother and a family, and it just, that was the thing that struck me. And the other thing I was going to say earlier about Yael killing him, it kind of reminds me of a book I read. I mean, one scene in it, Skeletons at the Feast, which was a novel about really a ghastly Holocaust novel, but the same kind of thing of acting tenderly, putting bodies on a platform, and then almost tenderly, and then setting the whole pile on fire. It kind of reminded me of that, and just the in war is just a horrible thing. It's just a ghastly thing from beginning to end, regardless.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for reminding us of that, which I think really does underlie a lot of what is coming out in this poem. And I absolutely think that it's critical for us to try and see the human in the other, no matter what divide we are standing across, a political divide, standing on two sides of a battle. I think that this is really something that our Jewish tradition calls us to do. And I think about today in Israel and Palestine, there are whole groups of parents of children who have fallen on both sides, meaning Jewish Israeli children and Palestinian children. Parents come together to work together for peace because they don't care about the politics. They have something in common, that they've both lost children. And it really they want to see the humanity in the other. And that's something that I think is really coming through here. Thank you for elevating that for us, Sherry. Okay, Libby, and then Phyllis.
Well, first of all, I want to pile on to what Sherry said. That was definitely beautiful and eloquent, that it was so interesting that after highlighting this heroism of Yael, we sort of look and see that the impact that heroism had on Sisera's family. And then the interesting, I'm trying to get my head around this about what ends up happening. And it looks like as Sisera's mother is saying, where is he? Why hasn't he come back? One of her ladies in waiting answers, and she's repeating that over and over, this sort of mantra to cling to of delusion. Oh, they must be raping women because that's what you do when you win. So he must be fine. He must be off celebrating his victory. And she's just kind of repeating that as a mantra. And then I think it's really odd that it ends with, so may all your enemies perish. I mean, and is Yah the same God as our God? And is that, it's just, that's fascinating that sort of seems to end on this assumption that her side has been victorious. It's wild.
Great. So Sisera's mother becomes one of the most complicated characters that we have in biblical literature because of what you just pointed out, which is that first we have this really humanizing moment where this mother is just gazing out her window, expecting to see her son come home any minute. And we know, we, the audience, know what she doesn't know, which is that her son has been killed. At this moment, only we know this, right? And so it's this really heartbreaking moment of a woman gazing out a window, waiting for her son to come home, and we know he's not coming. But then when she gets to this mantra, this, sort of like, aren't they finding and sharing the spoils, a girl or even two girls for each warrior, garments, all the plunder, things that he's going to bring home from me? Like, shouldn't he be coming home, walking down that dirt path at any minute with a woman that he's taken from the other side, who is going to be raped, who is a spoil of war, and things that have been stolen from the other side that are going to be gifts to me? Shouldn't he be walking down the dirt path with those things at any moment? So in the same moment that we are invited to have empathy for Sisera's mother and to remember that she has just lost her son, we are also invited to remember that if her son had been victorious, this is what would have been happening, right? And that there would have been even more destruction out of that. And that his mother is like, this is the thing that she's saying. She's not even just saying like, shouldn't he be coming home victorious right now? She is kind of rooting for him to be walking down that dirt path with a girl or two slung over his arm, right? And with some of the behaviors that are pretty troubling for us. So it's very interesting and very complicated. I'm not sure, and I don't think it's clear from the text itself, what happens here when we get to 31. And so may all your enemies perish, oh yeah, because remember that we're still in the larger poem that's being told, that's being said out loud by Deborah and Barak. So it may be that Deborah and Barak bring us into this little vignette of telling us what it's like at the home of Sisera's mother. And then they zoom out again and they say, so may all of your enemies perish, oh Yah. And so this oh Yah may actually be the believers of Yah saying that enemies shall perish, as opposed to a continuation of what Barak's mother says. It's not clear on the face of the text itself, but because of the fact that it's set in this larger poem, that may be what's happening here. Diane, did you have your hand up?
Yes, actually, that's what I was thinking. It was that going back and saying, this is what happens. Your mother will weep, she will, be in sorrow, but those who love you will be happy. And then what I also saw was wondering if this was like a warning poem. This is how, all you will feel if you come and try and attack us again.
Sure. And that's absolutely one of the ways that poems like this would have functioned, right? If a poem like this was traveling around a land and went from one campfire to another, and people heard this story, they would be less likely to, mess with the Israelites, right? So a poem like this could absolutely have been like a kind of propaganda of the day.
Especially given over to a woman to win the war. And I also found it really interesting is that Deborah names the woman and elevates her in this poem. And I just found that so wonderful that
she names Yael, you mean?
and it elevates her, to that position and continues to do so throughout this whole situation.
Right. Yeah. Excellent. Yael has really become a hero by this point. Rita.
Well, I think the fact that the final sentence of the poem is that, and the country had peace for 40 years, I don't think that's accidental. They've given you 2 points of view about war, being the victors and being the mother of the soldiers who have died. And war is so terrible that this kind of led to peace for a while. We had to recover from these awful events.
Yeah, excellent. It is really interesting that this poem about war and victory and death and murder and possible rape or avoided rape ends with, and the country had peace for 40 years. In a way, there's something about this that reminds me of what happens in the Purim story. When you closely read the Purim story, you see that Haman's children were also killed, just as Haman was. And so there's an invitation for you to do what Deborah does here and to actually try and just for a moment think about, like, what about Haman's wife who has lost her husband and all of her sons, right? So it's just an interesting detail that's included in that story. And that story ends, like, we celebrate it every year with costumes and Hamantaschen, and it's super fun. Purim is really fun. And at the end of the day, like, what are we celebrating? We're celebrating the fact that the Israelites went out and killed a whole bunch of people. There was a kind of like a reverse pogrom that was carried out. And then, of course, there's a period of peace after that. So there is this same kind of idea that, like, here we've had this like big, epic, violent piece of literature that ends with the peace that follows. Yeah, so I hope, Rita, which is part of what I think that you're saying, that like perhaps we learned from all of this violence to want a time of peace, and therefore we arrived at a time of peace. May peace be what follows war, and may we eventually learn from the horrors of war that all we really want is peace and not the war in the first place. Sherry and Steve.
I had a question, and Steve had a question earlier. There's, it seems like 40 years is a repeated theme throughout so much of this literature. Is there something that we need to know about 40 years?
Yeah, excellent. So 40 years absolutely did not mean 40 years. 40 years meant like a long time. It was like a shorthand for a long time. Like, we did not wander in the desert for 40 years. We wandered in the desert for a long time.
Isn't that a generation? Because people live mostly for just 40 years.
Yeah, could be a generation. Yeah, certainly was a generation when we're talking about the wandering in the desert.
Yeah, I have a comment on Sherry's earlier comment. She projected her values onto the mothers of the other soldiers. A lot of women, and I've read this in the literature from time to time, don't give a hoot what their kids do. They essentially disown them. So if they become a soldier and get killed, they don't give a damn. So I don't think that's all true. You have to look at it statistically. What Sherry's values are maybe the median value, but there's lots of people on the tail of the distribution.
Excellent. Well, there's certainly no such thing as anything that's all true. And I don't think that I at least would argue that when we read Torah, I don't know that we need to read it statistically. I think that when we look at it through a modern lens and ask what it has to teach us today, statistics could be one way that we, one sort of modern lens that we bring to it. But yeah, I think that that if you're, what you're saying is that like different mothers have different reactions to the actions of their children. I think that, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, there's no one truth. And I think this story in and of itself teaches us that these are all different perspectives on exactly the same experience. Deborah, Yael, and Sisera's mother all have an opportunity to offer us different experiences of and perspectives of the same experience. And what we get is three totally different things, which is very interesting. And I hope is something we can take with us into our regular lives, remembering that multiple truths coexist at the same time. Yeah, Rita.
Getting back to the number 40, it's been used for many different contexts. And I read recently that the word quarantine comes from 40, and it just means a long time to be away from people so that you're protecting the rest of the population. So 40 is sort of a magic number for a long time.
Yes, and that makes perfect sense, right? Quartet is a group of 4 musicians. A quarantine, like that makes sense that that word would be 4. And, you know, for those of us who have just survived 2 years of multiple quarantines, I think that we all know that that means a long time. Okay, we are going to move on to a little bit of modern midrash. But actually, before I bring in the poetry, I'd like to bring in some modern midrash in the form of visual art. So I'm going to stop my share for a moment. And the links to the things that I'm about to share were in the email from Laura, because as Steve pointed out before, the links in my PDFs don't always come through as clickable links, and I want you to have access to these things if you want to afterwards. So I brought in a few different visual depictions of this story. First, we have a Russian artist from an English Bible dated 1866. So this is Deborah. It's called Deborah Praises Yael, which is interesting to me because I don't think that we have any indication here of what it is that Deborah is doing. I mean, I think that it could just as easily have been called Deborah Prophesies, Deborah Judges, but it's interesting that it's Deborah Praises Yael. So either the artist or the person who put this encyclopedia together thought that this was the moment where she was saying, Sisera will be delivered into the hand of a woman, or it could be her telling it could be her reciting the poem afterwards, right? The poem that's in Judges 5. And this could be the moment where she is, you know, saying, Yael, most blessed of women, dweller of tents, etc. Anything that you notice, any thoughts on this piece?
One thing, there's this light about her, which makes it even more important what she's saying, I think.
Yeah, there's this like brightness here. It oddly, like, it doesn't feel Christian, like many of the visual images that we see have like a halo around a person. It's not that. It almost reminds me of a candle wick, and the idea of her as a woman of flames, right? Her arm, the way that the light is around her arm is almost like a flame around the wick of a candle.
She almost looks like the Statue of Liberty.
She does look an awful lot like the Statue of Liberty.
I don't know if this is just compositionally because the artist needs to make Deborah the center, but I find it interesting that she's the only woman, I think, in this picture. So she's surrounded by a bunch of men who are watching her, but they also seem kind of afraid of her. They are sort of stepping back a little bit and giving her space.
Interesting. And, you know, she was a prophet. And in general, I think male or female, people were a little bit wary of prophets. They were afraid of them sometimes. They just didn't believe them sometimes. But we certainly don't have a tradition in Judaism of people just embracing and following wholeheartedly their prophets. That's actually not how prophecy comes to us. So yeah, you can see distance and maybe a fear or a wariness. Excellent. Okay, so this is from 1739. I'm going to say probably an Italian painter from the name. So this is Yael with the tent peg. And I brought in a few pictures of Yael with the tent peg because I wanted you to see different lenses that artists have put on how they're interpreting what happens in this moment. Yeah, Sally?
Well, I was noticing in the previous picture, the faces were very Semitic looking. And in this, it's like, you know, Western European, Northern European more. She's very light skinned and he's pretty light skinned. And
Yeah, absolutely. So much of our visual art, especially Renaissance paintings that we have of biblical characters, are going to fall into that category. It's just that people painted people the way that they looked, you know, as opposed to having the historical knowledge to understand that actually people probably looked very different.
Yeah, but in both paintings, Deborah is strong looking. She's not like a small woman. She's got some, you know, strength to her.
So this is not Deborah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. This is Yael.
This is
Well,
Deborah.
Yeah, Deborah looks like she doesn't look, you know, like petite.
No, yeah. And so we actually have two different depictions of women depicted as strong in completely different ways, which is very interesting, right? Here, Deborah's strength obviously comes from like a spiritual, political power. There is something about her essence and the way she holds herself that makes people give her a little bit of space and yet give her their full attention. She commands them. Whereas here we have the physical strength of Yael as she is physically dominating Sisera. Sherry and Steve, did you have your hand up again?
Oh, yeah, there's a famous painting by Delacroix, A Liberty Leading the People, and that's a woman holding the French flag, you know, to try and get women's rights. In the French Revolution, the women got the right to vote. Then it was reversed when the royalty got into power. In the Bolshevik Revolution, the women tried to advance women's rights too, but then it got set back.
Well,
So,
2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. We'll get there one day, I hope.
I hope
Okay.
so too.
So here's another depiction of Yael and Sisera. Also, I think an Italian painter, circa 1593 to 1654. That's the life of this painter.
I was hoping you were going to have one of her. And I don't know if we're doing Judith later in this series, but Artemisia Gentileschi loved painting the gory death moments of women killing people in the Bible. And there are some of her Judith beheading Holofernes where, I mean, blood is sluicing out of his neck as she is cutting his head off. And I think she actually, the artist, had been a victim of sexual assault. And so I have always loved to imagine that this was her way of getting revenge on men who had traumatized her.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think that Judith might be my favorite story in biblical literature. She's certainly up there. I decided to save her for Hanukkah. So we'll definitely dive into Judith together come Hanukkah. But yes, you can see many similarities in the style of the art between this painting and the painting that you're referring to. And fun fact, the story of Deborah and Yael almost certainly influenced the writing of the Book of Judith. The Book of Judith is definitely a much later work. And the artist, the author would have had access to the book of Deborah and the story of Yael. And so the one almost certainly influenced the other, which is part of why we see so much similarity between them. So here we have another depiction of Yael and Sisera here. He's like really sleeping like a baby. Like this is how I imagine the scene happening when I read the story as it's told in Judges 4, that he's curled up, you know, he's kind of in the fetal position, he's sleeping like a baby, and she's not angry, she's powerful, but she's not, it's almost like a non-violent violence. She is serene in her face. She's determined in what she's going to do. But you know, in the lens of thinking of the story through motherhood, this entire image speaks the most to a mothering version of what happens in that moment. Here we have one that's just super fun. So another 16th century Italian painter. Here we don't have Sisera, we just have Yael. She just has like the hammer in her hand and this sort of defiant look on her face. This is the woman who is capable of committing the act that is about to be committed. This is not the woman in the moment of committing the act. And there's something that it's just, I don't know, there's something that's just funny to me about this painting. This one is also funny. Francisco de Goya. This is going to be sometime between 1740, so circa 1630. How is that possible? That's not possible. If this man lived for these dates, this is not when this painting could have been painted. Thank you, Wikipedia.
There you go. That's a Wikipedia entry that
but this is called Yael, Deborah, and Barak. So this is supposed to be Yael. This is supposed to be Deborah, and this is supposed to be Barak. I'm welcoming your thoughts on this particular retelling of the story or imagining of the story.
Deborah sure looks old.
She looks old. Yes, and what's she doing?
Praying in a Christian way almost.
Yes, for sure. This is a Christian influenced painting. But she's praying. This is a woman of action. A woman of physical action. This is a woman with a hammer in one hand and a tent peg in another and a determined face. And this is a woman who's praying. And Barak, how does Barak look here? He just looks like...
What the hell are you doing with that tent peg?
This man is not the person who's in charge in this story. He's also not the person who's in charge in Judges 4. But I think that's captured in this painting. But to me, there's something about the intersection of these two women that reminds me of what's going on right now in America with the debate about about how we're going to regulate guns. You know, those who offer thoughts and prayers versus those who want to take real and even extreme action. Sort of like that to me feels like the kind of essence of what's captured here. Julie and Rita, I just want to make sure your hands are still up for reading, right? I don't want to be not calling on you. Okay, great. Sherry and Steve, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, it's a question. Why the tent peg? I mean, was this a common way that people assassinated other people in those days? I mean, where did that come from? That's
a great question. Absolutely not. This is the only assassination by tent peg that we know of. I think that probably like the most likely answer to that question on a Peshat reading of the text, meaning just looking at the text on its face, is that this is a woman who was in her home and there was not a man there, and a woman wouldn't have had any reason to have a weapon. Probably when she looked around, the only thing that she saw that looked like a weapon was the hammer and the tent peg. She probably didn't have access to another weapon, is the most likely answer. The scholars who are interested in the reading of this story through a lens of motherhood say a tent peg is an object of creation of home. And so this is another way. Home is woman's sphere, woman's domain. So this is the object that she killed him with is something that's directly related to the home in a woman's domain.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Here we have a more recent painting between circa 1886 and 1902. This is just capturing a different moment. So this is capturing the moment when Yael is showing, here is Sisera. And so she's sort of peeling back the tent flap and come on in. So just interesting to capture a different moment in this scene. And then finally, sort of a more heartbreaking, we have this 1861 painting, The Mother of Sisera Looked Out a Window. And so this is, an artist capturing Sisera's mother. We've got the lattice here. She's in the window, and her face is absolutely at once looking in the direction of the path. So it's as if she's hopeful that he's going to come. But at the same time, the artist really captures a sadness in her eyes that lets you know that she's probably not accepted what she knows is the truth yet in this moment. That underneath the hopefulness of gazing in that direction is a fear, at least, if not a knowledge, that in fact her son is not coming home. And I just thought that this was beautiful. And it becomes complicated when we also know that this is the same woman who's saying, shouldn't he be coming home with 2 women over his shoulder to be raped, and with all of the goods that he's stolen from the others to give to me? It's a complicated, but I really appreciate that a visual artist wanted to capture this moment of Sisera's mother. Okay. I'm going to stop my share. And I am going to, for the last few minutes, invite you to some midrashic poetry. So I brought you 2 poems from a triptych, meaning a 3-part poem by Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt, called Judges Triptych, which is each part of the poem is about a different woman from Judges. The third woman in the triptych is Bat Yiftach, who is someone who we won't talk about today, but hopefully we will have a chance to talk about at another point in our studies over the course of the year. Okay, so 1, Devorah. Beneath her palm tree, Devorah, the honeybee, her sting intact, judged the acts of the Israelites. The people came with gifts of oil and flour and yearling lambs, and she answered them with justice. She sent for Barak in his leathers. Words fell from her mouth like honey, and he yearned to taste her sweetness. Come with me, he pleaded. I will relinquish my own glory if I can have you by my side. 900 iron chariots thundered. The infinite cast panic like a spell, and all Sisera's army was slain. And Devorah slept and dreamed. Sisera stumbles into a woman's tent. Yael's doors open wide to let him in. He drinks milk fermented in goat skin. He slides into sleep. Her tent pin rests at his sweaty temple. She drives it home. So before we move on to the Yael part, does anyone know why the poet is playing with honey in this poem?
Doesn't Deborah mean honey or bee? No, it means bee.
Yeah, perfect. So Devorah, the Hebrew word, is the word for a bee, for a honeybee. So there's a lot of play about the honeybee, her sting. Words fell from her mouth like honey, and he yearned to taste her sweetness. A lot of that is playing off of the idea that the Hebrew meaning for Devorah is honeybee. And then it's interesting how the scene of Yael slaying Sisera appears to Deborah, because Deborah is a prophet, and prophets sometimes receive their prophecy in dreams. So in this poem, Deborah sleeps and dreams, and what she dreams is actually the moment where Yael slays Sisera. Okay, so part 2, Yael. My husband is a Kenite. Kenites don't take sides. So when God told me what to do, I kept it to myself. Someday the sages will credit me with pluck and righteousness, even if my methods were obscure. But Sisera's mother, wrapped in happy fantasies of her precious son's return, will never be the same. The rabbis say, Sisera demanded my body. The rabbis say, we slept together 7 times. But you don't get to know. You can claim me as a righteous convert, but my story is my own. So in this retelling, the rabbi who wrote it in the voice of Yael as a persona poem brings in a lot of the midrash from the rabbis, right? The idea that she's plucky, that she's righteous, how much the rabbis loved the character of Yael comes up, but so too this, which we spoke about briefly earlier, that the rabbi said that there was a sexual component to this and that she seduced him. That also comes up. And then you see Yael taking issue with that and saying that she gets to claim this for herself. And actually that the fact that we can read this story and not know, the fact that, thousands of years later, here we are together, we read this story and we don't know, why did she kill him, right? This question that bothered us today and has bothered people for thousands of years. In this midrashic retelling, Yael says, you don't get to know because my story is my own, that it's from her perspective intentional that even thousands of years later, we can't answer it. And that's a kind of empowerment for Yael as a character, that only she gets to know what her actual story was. Okay, that's it. But I am going to say that if anyone feels like reading another poem, there's an excellent poem that I included called Femme Fatale, which is not specifically about Yael, but I think applies to her and is just a lovely little poem that I encourage you all to read if you so feel later. Okay, any final thoughts, questions, etc. before I say have a wonderful week?
I just want to say thank you. This was so enlightening and interesting. And I'm sorry I'm going to miss 2 weeks. I'm going to be hiking in Switzerland, but I'll be back in July.
Wow.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
you will be missed. I'm sure that will be much better than this.
right.
But if you want, the sessions will be recorded and you can watch them after you come back.
I did have one last thought. I always think this when we read, stories like, would you name your child after or give them a biblical name? And so Yael, which I think is a beautiful name, and it's sort of like yes and maybe no.
Yeah.
How
Yael is one
about
of my
me?
favorite.
How about me, who's Judith and whose Hebrew name is Hava Yael? So, watch out.
Well, you are all the power.
Don't come near me with no tent pegs, girl.
I
So-
absolutely agree, Sally. Yael is such a beautiful Hebrew name. And I think that if you choose to name your daughter Yael, you get to decide, what elements of that character you would like to wish to impart onto your child by giving her such a name.
So before people log off, if you contact Laura in the temple, and get on the Torah study email list, you can get all the paperwork and stuff in advance of these things from Sivan. So you just have to let Laura know that you want to be on the Torah study email list.
Great. Thank you all. This was wonderful. And I can't wait to do it with you all again next week.
Thank you. Steve has one more question.
Okay.
Oh, I just wondered whether she could have been insane when she did that.
Who, Yael?
Yes,
I mean, anything is possible. Steve gives you a thumbs up and says,
He's-
"In fact,
because
He's
I
reading
was
Bertrand
looking
Russell.
at Joan of Arc. Was she inspired by voices? Yael?
not that we know of from the Peshat reading." And I would say that, and that is absolutely possible. Anything is possible. And if we say that, are we not taking away some of her power?
Right. I don't know.
I think we leave her power because I think it's a good perspective that, I don't like that we glorify a way that someone kills someone else, which is obviously a painful and tortuous way to die. I don't like that, but I do like giving, the reading of her being in the power position and taking it and being acknowledged for it.
Right. And both things are simultaneously true. It's not a black and white story. It's very nuanced and complicated. Sally, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that next Sunday is Portland Pride, and Beth Israel has always had a pretty big group walking in the parade, which will conflict with our meeting time. So if you don't see some of us, we will be watching later, and we will be at the Pride celebration during the time that the class takes place.
Yeah, thank you for letting me know that. I personally hate to think of conflicting with Pride. I will at least check in with Rabbi Joseph about it. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if the dates can be changed at this moment, but I am personally quite sorry to hear that. Not just because I might miss some of you live, but also because I personally do not want to conflict with Pride.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll just mention is that before Pride, there's just thousands of people lined up waiting to walk in the parade, and we will be collecting signatures for our gun violence, our state's gun violence prevention petition to go on at Pride before we walk.
Great. Great. Thank you for sharing all of that. Thank you, all of you, for being here and for making this wonderful. It is always wonderful because of who you are. It's such a gift to be here with you. So Shavua Tov, happy Pride next Sunday, and I'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
This was
you.
amazing. Just
Very
Really
provocative.
amazing.
very provocative. It just really was. Just one last thing. Are you going to be around? You mentioned Hanukkah. Are you going to be around by next December? You're going to be with us.
I hope so. Rabbi Joseph has asked me to stay on to continue teaching Torah study for you all. Thank you. And I have said yes. And she asked me how long I could stay. And I said, really, as long as you'll have me. So at least where we stand now, there's no end date in mind. And so I hope to be here for Hanukkah and to bring my favorite Judith. Freely, my Judith session is pretty awesome.
Oh, that's
That
so
would be
wonderful to know that we have you for an extended period of time. I thought that you would be here for, like a half a dozen more sessions, and then that would be the end. I'm really delighted to hear that you're going to be able to stay on. That's wonderful.
Thank you. I hope so. So feel free to tell Rabbi Joseph that you would love to keep me, because the more she hears that, then the more likely she is to welcome me back. So I'm happy
We'll
to
do
be
that.
here for as long as we can.
That's
We'll do
great.
that.
We'll start a petition to keep you on.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye-bye
you so
now.
much.
Bye.
You're welcome. Be well.
Be well.